this month is Black History Month. And I think as we kind of came out of May and June, it was a big eye-opener for so many people, especially I think collectively for the body of Christ. And I think as VOUS Church made a decision that we really drew a line in the sand that this is something that we want to be a part of. We want to be a part of the solution, that we want to make sure that we continue to get educated, that we continue to raise awareness, but we also don't just live a life of being quiet, but that we actually fight to be anti-racist. And I love it because we always talk about the idea that you don't rise to the level of your goal, you fall to the level of your system. And sometimes there's just great systems that are in place for us. You know, like I'm thankful that there's a holiday called Christmas and there's a holiday called Easter, because it goes, you know what? I probably should thank God that he was born and probably thank God that he resurrected, but just in case I might forget, here's a holiday that's already in place that's gonna force me into this thing that I believe. And so rather than trying to reinvent the wheel and try to come up with stuff, we've been really trying to lean into just the moments that have already been set in motion through our culture and through society. One of those is Black history. And I really want to take time having some internal conversations with some people that I think are doing a whole lot of good in the community, that actually bring a whole lot of expertise towards the subject. And I think the whole point today, I'm gonna introduce our guest here in just a moment, but for us is that as a team, number one, that we can continue to say, you know what, like, how can we be a part of the solution? But also, how can we create a safe place that we can ask questions around Black history, around what is it like to be Black in America? What's it like to be Black in the body of Christ? Where is our church royally missing it? Where am I as an individual royally missing it? How can we grow? I wanna create a safe place, because I know places like social media, places like culture, the news, it just feels like, you know what, I'm just better off not opening my mouth because I feel like I'm gonna offend someone or hurt myself. And that's not the point of this meeting today. The point of this meeting today is to create a safe environment. And so I thought for the first kind of talk that we would do, that I would interview and just have a conversation with someone who's become a good friend of mine. I think a lot of you in the room know Rodney and Ramona are a big part of our church. They serve in our church, they go to our church, but a lot of you might not know. And by the way, Rodney's incredible in the gym. He comes over to church before church, and it's not fun when he comes. It's like in fact, today I did a workout with a mask on, but you did a lot of working out with the mask on. That's a whole nother, like,
never doing it again.
Yeah, that's tough, bro.
It's rough.
That's like Bane, and you're like, can't breathe.
The CDC does not like approve that, actually. I just do it just cause, and I won't do it anymore.
Yeah, I did it. The gym I went to today, like, you have to wear a mask. I was like, oh man, and I was gassed, but I'm just giving you kudos because you did do a lot of working out early days in the mask. But I think that we'll get into what Rodney does, but I think that Rodney presents himself as a really credible voice and someone that can help us contextualize a lot of what's going on. And so maybe just to kick it off, Rodney, number one, we love you. We love you and Ramona. Can we make some noise for Rodney? Can we welcome him to our staff meeting? He's taking time off of his very busy job, which we'll hear about right now, to come and just spend about 30 minutes with us, talking to us, and we'll see how time goes. Maybe we might get some more questions, but maybe just start by just kind of giving a little bit of your background, but then just what it is that you're doing today here in Miami, because that's really why I wanted to chat with you.
Absolutely. So I grew up in a military family, military brat, so lived all around America, which is fitting today because like you're wearing like combat boots, and I'm wearing this shirt with actually P-51 Mustangs on it, which are the planes that the Tuskegee Airmen flew throughout World War II. We can get into the Black history facts later. But in any event, so lived all around, went to undergrad and law school in Ohio.
Tell them real quick, because I do think it's important. How many high schools did you go to?
Went to like 14. Yeah. So I went to like 3 different high schools in like 1 year at one point. So that was just, it was crazy. But as you go, like you start to get more accustomed to moving and things like that. So it became more of the normal than the unexpected. So went to play college football. After I graduated law school, joined the military, keep upon the military tradition in my family, and then moved to Miami to start doing the work I'm doing now. So,
and maybe share a little bit about the work that you're doing today.
Yeah. So I work as an executive for a City of Miami office that does oversight of our police department. So essentially, if a community member or if someone that's outside the community has a complaint against the City of Miami Police, they file in our office. We investigate the matter, and we try to hold officers accountable, whether it's in discipline or extra training. But the main thing that we do is that we provide a voice for community members to feel as though that their voice can be heard in situations where they may feel marginalized. So,
now, when you walk into a space, like especially around maybe potentially police officers, is it like, oh man, Rodney's coming over here? Is it seen like, oh man, this guy's like on us? Or
it's a catch-22. Sometimes I do get that vibe. You know, people always ask me the question, how often do you get stopped by police? And I'm like, all the time. But really, they don't really harass me too much. Typically, when I do go into a space where there's a lot of police officers, and it's not like the chief of police or someone like that, they always have questions. They always want to come, do you hate police? Do you want us to defund? They come straight in, they circled you, and usually you go into spaces kind of, at least in my profession, with, a different idea of what public safety should be. So some of those questions are expected, but it never, devolves into a contentious situation or a situation where I feel unsafe. It's more so that they want to engage, and usually by the end of the conversation, they know how I feel and I know how they feel, and they leave with a better idea of me, and I get some more insight on how they feel as well.
What's the mindset that you would say, because this is a room full of leaders, we've got our college students, we've got staff. What's the mindset that you have to take on, because so much of what you're doing is trying to create accountability, and you're also trying, in many times, to create accountability for those that are in a high level of authority. What's the mindset that you have to take on as a leader to make sure that you keep your heart not from becoming bitter, resentful, critical? Is there any things that you could maybe just share with us? Because I think constantly we're trying to lead people, and sometimes, as a pastor, as a leader, it's like, hey, how's your spiritual life, man? It just seems like, oh, here comes that guy. He's going to be on me, or he's coming against me. Is there anything you could say that would be helpful to us?
Yeah, so people typically come into the space on the offensive, or, and as they speak, they get more defensive as they go. So I always try to go in, with a heart of just listening more than I speak. And as the conversation devolves, you really understand that you have more in common than the differences that are, initially appeared. And you just create collaboration and cohesiveness based upon the commonalities. And when you really break down like accountability and, job skills and look at it as topics and not necessarily values, and you can hear that the more you listen, you get to real collaborative, practical solutions. When we talk about accountability, that's something that's really inherent to like the human existence. Most people expect to be held accountable if something goes wrong. And I think that tenet is something that we all share. It's just figuring out how we agree on those things. So the more you listen, you can kind of find those similarities in the conversation, and then you just kind of push it out to the forefront. Like, you agree that if I show up late to work, I probably should get, some level of accountability. That's all I'm saying too when I say police officers should be held accountable. So in that same fashion, we come to an agreement that the core root of what we're talking about, we all agree on. We just got to figure out how we do it more practically.
Very, very good. What I love about Rodney, and I think it's true for all of us, we all have our own experiences, and sometimes those things that on paper look really bad, 13 different high schools, I probably could do another talk about the pain of that and the trauma potentially of that, but what I do know that the result of that has been you are one of the most adaptive people. I've had him in many different environments. He can show up into a room where he's the odd man out. He doesn't know 13 other people at the dinner party, but by the end of the night, he's telling stories. He's won people over. Your ability to be flexible and your ability to figure out those things, I think it's not something that you just teach or say right now, but I think that you go in doing that in your personal life as well. And so it's something great that we can learn. Today, as I'm saying, I wanted to have a conversation because it is Black History Month, but even as I'm saying that, there's a system in our society that, hopefully gives us freedom to have more conversations and to give honor where honor is due. Let's maybe just start, if we can, by going, why is Black History much more than just a month? I mean, like, it shouldn't just be a month, right? But it kind of seems like, all right, cool, we can have those conversations in February and then go back to our normal life in March. Maybe just weigh into that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think some of that thinking is kind of natural to the American existence. And I think a lot of that's due to our geographical space in the world. And I say that in two ways because, Black history started before Black people came to America. But we often think in our siloed existence that, hey, it's really just about when Black people came to America. It's just the American Black history experience. And the reason why we feel that way is because we're separate and a part of the rest of the world. We often say, at least in the military, America's greatest strength as well as their greatest weakness is where we're centered in the world. We're far away from our enemies, yet we're also far away from our friends. And I think when we look at, Black History, the month, we really just kind of couch it with, okay, what's the American Black history experience? And for a lot of people, that isn't necessarily the best experience, even, from the reason why Black people are in America. So I think it's really important that we look outside of that experience to say, okay, well, Black history is more than just what Black people went through here in America, but also some of their great achievements over the course of human history. Even when we talk about it in the context of how Africans really integrated Christianity throughout Africa and Europe, there's just such a rich history of what Black history means. And when we just try to pack it into all in the 1 month or just in one geographical space, we lose a lot of great goodness, culture that all of us would really relate to. And it goes back to what we were saying earlier. When we're looking for things for just relatability and compatibility and collaboration, if we just look at a small piece of that, we don't get the full picture. And so because of that, we kind of get pushed in different corners. And that level of duality is really toxic, because then it becomes, are you pro this or anti that? But if you're not taking into the full picture, if you're not stretching out your mind to really look at why is it more than just, Black History Month, you miss all of that. And I think the more we kind of open our minds to, well, let me look at the other things that involve Black history, not just the inventions or the Martin Luther Kings, which are all good things, don't get me wrong, but it started long before that, and it continues after that. So I think it's important we keep that in mind.
It's very good. I think one of the things that's been really, the silver lining of 2020 in our church context is that we've now gotten to take this, very local expression that's been happening here called VOUS Church, and now today we hear these stories that there's someone from the Philippines who's going to a crew, or there's these people from Australia now that are worshiping with us. And in many ways, the setback or the challenge has created this awesome comeback, also this awesome opportunity that we get to have a global expression now. We get to kind of reach more people. And I'm excited about that. Yet I signed up for a local context, which is to serve a local community, which still is I believe my greatest calling and my greatest mission, which is to serve the city of Miami. I think sometimes when we talk about like Black history, we can even what you're kind of leaning into, it's like, I know these maybe big famous names. I don't want to for one second come off taking something away from them, but I think many times we can miss out on the stories that are right, underneath our nose in our local context. I was wondering today if you could maybe just share anything about Black history in Miami.
Yeah.
Because I think Overtown's full of it. I think the Lyric Theater, where we started our church, was full of it. Like, is there anything that you could maybe help us? Because I think it makes all of us better ministers, better pastors, and hopefully much more in tune with the people around us and who we're serving first and foremost.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the basic founding of Miami was founded upon, Black immigrants from the Bahamas that came here and decided, hey, we're going to settle in this region and kind of create our own space. I think a lot of that history from the Bahamian immigrants and the Haitian immigrants and such is still kind of seen throughout the inner workings of our city. And as obviously as people migrated towards Miami from the north of Florida and other locations, it kind of grew into kind of what we see now. But the general history of Miami is really steeped in the Black existence in some ways. A lot of the famous people that we see in the national area started in places like Coconut Grove. We have the first Black astronaut that came from that location and region. A lot of our schools are named after just great American poets and writers. But I think one of the more beneficial things that I always look at when I think about Miami is that we are not diverse because we want to be. It's more so it happened because of the way our nation grew up. And when I look at Miami, I look at it as a place that, hey, this can kind of go out into the rest of America, but it didn't. It kind of stayed here. And that's because of a lot of the Black influence that remained in this space and kind of pushed Miami to be uncomfortable. And I think that's seen in everything that we do, from the Hampton House in Overtown, like you said, the Lyric Theater. Obviously, now there's a movie out about it. One Night in Miami,
Yeah,
but
I haven't seen it yet.
It's a great movie.
Yeah.
You should check that out. But before that came out as a movie, a lot of people didn't know about that occurring. When you had the segregation of Miami at the time, and you had three very prominent Black people that decided, hey, for this one night, we're gonna take to the streets and have a good night, and we're gonna talk about our existence and how that was beneficial. And then later, you even have writers like James Baldwin that talked about it in his books, and how Sam Cooke and Muhammad just were doing great things at the time. And that started in Miami. Those seeds were sown here and planted here. So there's so much great and rich history in Miami that started here and then went out through the rest of America. So I think we should champion those things because it doesn't happen anywhere else.
I haven't gotten to see the film yet, but I saw a documentary on Sam Cooke a couple of years ago, and they referenced that night. They referenced that conversation that took place. From then to now, we still have so much to do, but there's been tremendous progress. Talk about maybe just from your vantage point, from history, or just even where we're at today. Talk about some of the progress.
Yeah,
in terms of where there is hope.
Absolutely. It's the Black existence in America has always been one of progress. And that's also the same reason why we can't stop talking about racism just post-emancipation, right? When we look at the Black existence, oftentimes people think, hey, slavery ended almost 200 years ago. Why are people still upset? Why are Black people still crying? You've been free now since 1886. And that can't be true in and of itself if we're still talking about progress now, because it's more so looking at the idea of like, okay, things are still having to get better. Why is that the case? Well, that's because things are still probably broken. You wouldn't have to get better if things were fine the way they were. And so when you look at it just from a historical content, and, you say 1886 is the threshold, Black people are free, and if that were the case, everything would be great. But we saw from there that there's been tremendous amount of history or legal history that showed a different side of the coin. We saw, Jim Crow era laws and regulations that put into place to ostracize Black people from gaining jobs in houses. We saw then, almost 30 years after Jim Crow, FDR coming in 1913 or 1930 to do the New Deal regulations, and how that kind of gave birth to redlining of homes and allowed, a systematic racism to perpetuate in housing, and who got homes and who didn't.
Yeah, can you just for some people, because once again, just from my context of talking to people, how many people really don't understand redlining? Maybe just put a little bit of language to it so people can make it, they can hear it and go, I can repeat that and understand that now.
Yeah, for sure. And it's really basic. So in 1930, obviously FDR had the New Deal system of things to help America get back on its feet. And it did. It set a fair minimum wage, labor standards, things of that nature. And then one of the other things he did was create this organization called like the Housing Committee, for lack of better words. And that committee was really denoted to allowing people that lost their homes or didn't have homes to get bank financing to build their homes. Now, obviously, it's a really intricate process now, and we went through it to procure a new home or to procure a new property. But it was even harder back then because no one had any money, no one had any credit scores. So they set up this institution. They said, hey, we're going to ensure that people that need homes the most get them, but we're going to do it based upon these maps. And the reason why we're doing it based upon these maps is because we just can't give out free checks to everyone, or at least that's the mystery was clouded in. And these areas were color-coded. There was areas where they said, okay, we can't give financing to this location. And those locations were red areas. And everything else was pretty much good. The issue is that at the time, the maps were based upon segregation. The red areas were the areas that were usually the Black areas or the hood areas or the neighborhoods you didn't want to be in because the property values weren't sufficient. So banks decided, okay, we won't give housing to these locations. And why that is bad is because the main way people transfer wealth is through their homes. I mean, most people have generational wealth because they're living in their grandparents' house and they haven't had to pay rent for like 3 decades or something ridiculous, right? And that benefit wasn't available for Black people even now. Like redlining is still a thing.
Yeah.
And so because of that, you have just generational swarts of wealth that weren't passed on to Black people, and it's still perpetuated today, and it's still good law to an extent. So that happened in the 1930s. That's really recent history when that law was put into place, and that banks still rely upon today. So just transferring from there in 1930. You have Brown v. Board of Education 1 and 2, which desegregated schools in the 1950s and then subsequently in 1955. And even then, that was tumultuous. It wasn't like, the Supreme Court handed down this edict and said, desegregate schools, and everyone was like, all right, we're going to do it, right? We know what happened there. The National Guard had to go in. They had to force schools to do it. So even though the law was put into place in the 50s, we didn't really see substantial push behind that until the early 60s. So the 60s, obviously, everyone probably knows, was a really large time for civil rights. 64, you had the Civil Rights Act that not only looked at just fair labor standards, but also looked at who you can employ. We had the EEOC that came out and says, hey, we're going to have protected classes of who you must hire and who you should hire based upon the ability they can bring into your job. And so now we're naturally into like the early 70s to the mid 70s. And we see a lot of those regulations come out and used at the forefront. Towards the early 80s to late 90s, when we see our affirmative action laws, which talks about fair payment standards and who you must hire at your jobs. And then as we get into the early to late 90s, you have, obviously Obama administration, the Clinton administration, and the Bush administration, and they came in to really say, hey, Black people and also women, they should, start having some better rights because we're not treating them right either, and they should get paid an equitable wage, and we need to look at how we do that. So Title VI and Title VII came out. So you see this progression of laws, both via the Supreme Court and legislation, that is trying to get towards what equity looks like. And that's what people, you're really trying to counterbalance now. You have equity and you have equality. Like, why are those things different? Why are they so important? And right now, Black people in America are really looking for equity, and I think what we're seeing now is the symbology of what does equity look like. And the main way people explain it now is like, hey, if everyone's been running a race and it's the same race, everyone else in America, with the exception of people that are marginalized and oppressed because of their, gender, race, or socioeconomic status, have been running this race since the beginning of America, and they've had a substantial head start. They've had, banks giving them mortgages for homes. They've had generational wealth, you name it. They've been running this race. And everyone else has been running it too, except they started later with like a 50-pound anvil on their back with no Nikes to run. And so because of that, we don't want an equal chance to run the race because we're theoretically running it. We just want the opportunity and access to have an equitable chance to win it as well. And the funny thing about that, and I use the context of a race as symbology because you can kind of see the distance, but just because someone else is running in the race and you have an equal chance to run in the race, it doesn't mean you lose. It just means that everyone else has a fair chance to gain something because all of these things are achievable at the same time. It's not like just because I have $1 million doesn't mean you can't have $1 million. Just because I have a house doesn't mean you can't get a house. It just means we both have the opportunity to do it together. And that is really the core of capitalism. It's, and I tell people this all the time, Black people are some of the most ambitiously capitalistic people you can find. We will find ways to sell a t-shirt on the corner. That's all we had, And I think that symbology is really important because when we look at it from the capitalistic sense, which is a very conservative value, you say like, oh, well, it's not like they want an extra helper hand. They just want the ability to do things at the same rate that I can do it too. And that's equity.
It's very, very good. I think we should put our hands together. That's just off the dome.
Freestyle.
I don't know how you just freestyle all that history like that.
Just stream of consciousness, just don't stop speaking.
I think what you're laying out, though, is a picture of progress, slow progress. Yeah. But I do think we should give some weight just for a moment for those on this day, just as we're all learning. What are the current hardships? Like, what are the problems, the 2021 problems? I mean, in terms of, we can say racism, but how is that running down into real problems for real people with real problems right here in our city?
Yeah, so that's one of the things I look at is really like the intersections of issues. Yeah. Oftentimes we look at the policing situation and we just think, oh, this is like a criminal justice issue, and if we fix the criminal justice system, then everything is fine. But I look at it more in the health context. I look at, when police officers are operating in misconduct, it creates a health care burden upon our system and the people that they choose. And this is why I feel this way is that, an officer that may be having a bad day for whatever reason arrests someone, maybe, unrightfully so. That arrest then follows them through their whole life. If you're arrested on a misdemeanor offense, that can preclude you from getting a driver's license at a young age, precludes you from getting a level of certification if you want to become a barber or hairstylist. But it also makes it hard for you to go to college in some instances, or even sit for a licensing exam like the bar exam if you want to become a lawyer. So that one instance in the beginning of your life can really, pay very bad dividends for you later. So that's one. And because of that, it kind of extends to the rest of your family as well. Well, if I can't make a living for myself, I'm probably a burden on my mother or grandmother or whomever else that's supporting me. And so that's taken away from their lifestyle as well. So when we talk about the issues that Black people are facing, we have to look at it not only from, a criminal justice issue or, a crime issue. We have to look at it from a healthcare issue as well. Because if you're not able to sustain a life for yourself, that hurts you internally. That might hurt your emotional resilience and your overall stress level. And so because of that, you just have so many debilitating things that are hitting you all at once. Hey, I can't do the job I want to because of this arrest record. I wasn't able to go to school because maybe my education system doesn't provide me an equal chance to get a K through 12 education, whether it be because the schools don't have enough money, the schools don't have adequate teachers and funding, you name it, education is an issue for Black people. And then that extends to other things as well. If I can't get a good education, maybe then I can't provide a life for me because I have to work a minimum wage job, and that minimum wage that I'm even getting is still below the poverty line. I often tell people that, hey, some of the more prevalent issues that Black people face on a day-to-day is just getting to Friday. That idea in and of itself, we all take for granted. We just assume that we're going to get to Friday and everything's going to be okay. But for a lot of Black people that are living in America today, that is extremely difficult. And it isn't because of anything they've done on themselves. Rich, sometimes people look at me like, hey, Rodney, you're able to do it. You went to law school, you were able to do these things, you overcame stuff. Why can't everyone else, right? And it really isn't about me. It really isn't about my experience, because in some ways I've been very fortunate as well. I haven't had some of the hindrances or hardships that someone else have, right? But the idea here is that no one should be able to hit like the life lottery of where you're born and have such a substantial step ahead as anyone else. And I think that is the hardship Black people are facing in 2021, because now more than ever before, you do need a really good education in order to get a step ahead. You do need your communities to be better served and under police, because you may get arrested for something that's really frivolous and it just derail your whole life. Or you do need good access to healthcare because you live in a food desert or a food swamp and can't eat good nutrition. So there's so many things that plague the Black community, and we look to government, we look to nonprofits, we look to philanthropy to assist in these things, not because we absolutely think we can't help ourselves, because we do think that's the case. We just didn't hit the life lottery. And no one should have that far of a step back because of where they're born.
It's very, very good. I like that language too, the life lottery.
You have no control over where you're born.
Yeah.
The fact that I was born to a father who was in the military and a mom, they both love me and really put into, who we are, kind of made me who I am. I shouldn't have that much more of a benefit because someone else wasn't born to my parents. But in America, that is true in so many ways. And we, as a community and as a people, should take interest in that in ways that are above ourselves, and oftentimes we don't.
So good. Rodney really encouraged me a whole lot back in May. It was a difficult time for our entire nation, and I know I was looking for education and for answers, and I think maybe sometime after George Floyd was murdered, I think I got on the phone with you, and you were so kind, you were so humble, and you answered so many of my questions. But then, I don't know if you can remember this moment, like I think I was getting frustrated or I was getting fired up, and I was making a whole lot of big declarations. And I don't know if you remember this, but you just said, hey, Rich, I actually don't think that's your role in society. And you really encouraged me and affirmed me to play my role as a pastor and as a leader, to speak hope and to speak faith. I know you're not a theologian, but you're a big part of our church. What would you say, because we could break down, what is there hope, or what can we do? And I think that there's a lot of things that we can do. We can get involved with our cities. We can hold more and more conversations. We can diversify our friend group. There's things we can do, but maybe just for a moment, you go to a church, you're a Black man who just gave us Black history in about 6 minutes. So you know what's going on, but you've also decided to insert yourself into a context that could put yourself in a vulnerable spot. That you have a pastor who's a white guy, and you're in a church that's diverse. Maybe and I'm not trying to get you to speak for all Black people, but maybe just from your context, what would help us as ministers? I want you kind of maybe think through that filter, what is the church? How can we in Miami as pastors, aside from voting, what can we do to lead better? What is it you're looking for out of your church when it comes to this topic of racism, when it comes to this idea of the Black experience?
Absolutely. So I always look at our church, and even to myself as a core tenet of my character is just to love as much as possible. I always say that what the actions that I do or what I do or how God uses me as a vessel, I just want people to see me and then see God and want to get closer to Him based upon what we're doing. And I think oftentimes when you lead with love and hope, just outright, hey, I'm just going to love on you and be helpful and kind of listen to what you're doing, that is something that is just wholly missing from our society. And every now and then we'll have the illusion of what that is. Maybe you'll watch a talking head on the news and someone will be talking, everyone else will just be kind of waiting there, but really they're just waiting on their turn to speak. I think right now more than ever before, we just gotta love and listen, and I think if we do that as a church, it'll be contagious. Everyone will just be like, oh, well, maybe if they can do it, why can't I? And that will just start to permeate throughout our communities. And even when, like you said, when we're speaking, I just think it's really incumbent upon ourselves to do that inner reflection,
Yes.
to figure out what our roles are. Because if you try to solve everything, you're going to burn yourself out, and you won't even do it well. One thing that I really try to focus in on 2020 is really getting into a space where it was just perfect practice, like doing things deliberately in a way that achieved a level of success or goodness based upon what that was. And what I found out is that if I got 100 things going over here and 100 things going over here, yeah, those things I'm gonna be able to do something, but it won't be 100%. It won't be as good as it could have been. And I think when we kind of have our roles or priorities kind of mixed up, we're never giving our all into something else. And it really gets confusing. Instead of, ministering or, championing a cause, instead you're too busy trying to balance your schedule. And I don't think our focus should be utilized there, because there's 300 million people in America. And if everyone kind of played their role and says, hey, this is my piece of the puzzle, then it's gonna be great.
Good.
And oftentimes people will push you into those other corners, and it creates that duality. So I always say, like, hey, there's gonna be people that are protesting or marching in the street or saying, defund the police or whatever it may be. And maybe that's their role. Maybe they need to make us feel uncomfortable, because in that uncomfortable, we're gonna grow. But that's not Rodney's space. I'm the practical administrator that says, okay, this is your idea. Let's see how we can make it work. And I think that's kind of where we need to be in the space, so that, make light work, eat elephant.
Very good. Can we thank God for Rodney today? So good. So good. We're grateful for you.
I appreciate it.
We love you. We admire you. Honestly, you're an inspiration. And you've encouraged me a whole lot this past year, whether you knew it or not. And I just want to say thank you for that. And I think Rodney, just from my conversations, I think he wants to be a resource. He's part of our community, he's part of our church. And so I think he's someone who brings really great perspective. He's up in these streets, hearing these incidences and these events, and has a whole lot of data and experience to back it. And so if you've got questions, let's definitely be bringing those to him, and definitely be seeking out his counsel. I love that concept of just loving and listening, which is hopefully always the posture of all of us. That we want to be those types of people. Yesterday's sermon, talking about just this idea of Jesus constantly in disagreement with the Pharisees. It's so easy for us to preach and be like, the Pharisees and the Pharisee. But I really think the Bible is actually going, you should read the Bible going, you are the Pharisee.
Yeah.
Because trust me, most of us behave more like them than we do like Jesus. And I'll be the first to say that. And so when you actually take on their perspective and you read it, you're like, oh, this stuff is hitting a little harder. And so I just want to tell you that we love you. We're grateful for you. One more time, can we thank God for Rodney? Amazing, man. So good. I love it.
I appreciate you, brother.
Amazing. Hey, Rich Wilkerson here. I want to say a big thank you for watching today's content, believing and trusting that it impacted you. And if it did help you or encourage in any way, I would love for you to like it and share it with some other people. Make sure to subscribe to the VOUS Church YouTube page, where you can get more content just like this. And while you're there, go peruse the gallery, as they say, and see past talks and past content that I believe is gonna help you. I love you. Best is yet to come.